So I'm very happy to introduce Vince Trotter, who is the Agricultural Ombudsman and also the Sustainable Ag Coordinator at UC Cooperative Extension Marin County. He has worked extensively with many small farmers, ranchers, and producers and has a lot of experience to share. He will also be joined today by Janet Brown, who is a longtime farmer and owner of Allstar Organics, and she will be sharing her experience as well. So thank you both for being here, and I will turn it over to you, Vince.
Great. Thank you, Liana. It's great to be here, everyone. I appreciate folks coming to participate in the webinar today. We will do some introductions here in just a second, tell you more about myself and give Janet a chance to tell you about herself. I just want to remind everyone of something that Liana was saying earlier. If you have questions as we go along, please use the chat box at the bottom. It's the little speech bubble icon at the bottom of your screen. Don't want to miss your questions as we go along. So when we hit good points to be able to answer them, we'll pull those out of the chat box. So please use that as we go along. And then also we are recording today's webinar, and that'll be available later on. So both in terms of knowing that if you missed something, you can watch it later and catch it again. That's great. That helps take some of the pressure off. But also just so that if you want to keep your camera and your mic off, that way it won't be in any way a part of the recording. So with that, let's talk a little bit about ourselves. So who am I? My name is, as Liana said, Vince Trotter. I work with UC Cooperative Extension in Marin County. If you don't know anything about Cooperative Extension, there is a Cooperative Extension office in every county of every state. And we are there as essentially a channel for all the information that generally is being researched and generated at the university level, and making sure that it gets down into the communities. Cooperative Extension does work in youth development. We do programs like 4-H, nutrition, natural resource management, and agriculture. Agriculture is sort of my area, and I work specifically in Marin County, and there I have these two hats: Agricultural Ombudsman and Sustainable Ag Coordinator. As the Sustainable Ag Coordinator, I'm responsible for bringing new practices and helping start new enterprises, really working with farmers and ranchers to do whatever it is that is going to help them extend the viability of their farm into the future. And sometimes that's an agricultural practice. Sometimes that's about better managing their natural resources. Sometimes it's about a new enterprise or a change to their business practice. And then you can imagine that all of those things potentially touch on a number of rules. And that's where my role as Agricultural Ombudsman comes in. So I am someone that farmers and ranchers can contact to find out, is there a permit I need? Is there a license? What do the laws say about this thing that I want to do, whether that's build a barn or dig a pond or start a value-added food business? And because I work for the university, I'm an educator. I don't make rules, and I certainly don't enforce rules. So folks can pretty much bring any question they want. And so my two roles work together nicely. And through that, I get to work with a lot of farms on a lot of different things. So it's really nice to be here and talk about one very specific thing, which is value-added processing. But I thought that it would be really nice to talk to somebody who's been in the thick of value-added processing for a while and knows a lot about it. And so that's where Janet Brown comes in. And she's going to bring that perspective of both a farmer and a value-added producer. And maybe Janet, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Janet Brown, and our farm is Allstar Organics. We've been a certified organic farm in Marin County for about 26 years. And we started out, we didn't know a thing, not one thing. We had a dream for a long time to want to farm. And I guarantee you we had no idea what we were talking about. But we started by planting out some heirloom tomatoes And that was our first crop. And then from there, we diversified a little into basil. And over the years, we finally got a year-round cropping system. And I think about 5 years in, 4 or 5 years in is when we first started our first run at value added, which we can talk about later, but it's become an important part of what we do, an important part of our farm identity. And I'm really excited to be here and be talking to you. And if nothing else, I just hope you find some inspiration or encouragement to go ahead and take the next step in whatever it is you're thinking about.
Awesome. Thank you, Janet. And so as we go through today, there'll be different moments where I'm gonna look to Janet to share some of her perspective from doing the things that we're describing in principle. And also, I'm hoping that when we go do some Q&A, that you will have good questions to direct to Janet, and she can share, from her own immediate experience. Before we go any further, I'm just going to back up the slides because we've had a few people join us, and I want to make sure everyone understands the interpretation aspect. So once again, we have this webinar being offered in both Spanish and English. And if you are listening in English, you can click the globe icon down in your Zoom control bar and select English. We have instructions here for folks who are wanting to listen to the webinar in Spanish. And again, they're going to select that globe and choose Spanish from the options. So with that, let's go back in and find out who are the people who are together with us in this webinar. So I'm actually going to throw up a poll. If you're new to Zoom, I don't think that this is going to confuse you too much. Right now, you should see some questions. And the question is, what do you produce? So just to get a sense of who's here today, go ahead and select what it is that you are producing on your farm or ranch. You can choose multiples. You're not limited to just one. But go ahead and take a second and click the things that you're growing. It's really helpful for us to know maybe where to focus a little bit more and where we can step off the gas a bit. Okay, one more second to get your answer in. Tell us what you're producing. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end that and show you the results. So this is who is on the webinar today. Definitely a majority of folks in vegetables, but I see also there's a good amount of tree fruit or nuts producers, and then a little bit of meat and dairy. So good to know. We're going to cover definitely vegetables and fruit related things. We'll touch a little bit on meat, and then anything that we don't address because of what you're producing, what's unique to your operation, just know that I am a resource to everyone here today. We can work through the details of your operation and go deeper in any way that's helpful. So let me ask you another question now. Let's see, I'll stop sharing that result and let's look at a second question. And that question is, why value added? So what is in your head that is bringing you to this webinar today? Once again, it might be multiple things, right? It might be many reasons why you're thinking about value added. You can choose them all if they're part of your thought process, or you can just click other and you could enter your own reason in the chat. Maybe there's something that's not even mentioned here. I see a few people. Oh, we're climbing. We got about 6 people have answered. There's more of you out there. There must have been something that brought you to log in today and spend 90 minutes with us. What is so appealing about value-added production? I do see at least one person choose other. If you want to tap that into the chat box, let us know. Maybe there's some completely other and interesting reason why a person might think about value-added production. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and end that poll and show you guys. So the main reason seems to be that we've got a lot of excess product out there. Too many cucumbers, too many almonds, too much milk, and you're kind of hoping maybe there's something that can be made from that. And that doesn't surprise me. All of these are reasons that I have heard before, and reasons that have brought people to value-added production. Janet, do you want to jump in here and tell us, was there one of these that resonated for you in terms of why you decided at Allstar Organics to do value-added production?
Well, I checked, I've got lots of stuff. Maybe I can turn it into something. So I'm in that larger crowd. And, most of it for me, I was just a little creeping, crawling toward my destiny, I guess. But the first round was having planted a lot of heirloom roses. And I assured my husband that I had a plan for them, but that wasn't true. I had no plan. I just wanted a rose garden. And then when I had all these roses, I thought maybe I'd make some bouquets. They were spectacular. Took them to florists. Well, it turns out there's a lot more to making a bouquet than you might think. And florists would say, oh, these are gorgeous, but you know what? I need them to be all the same flower. Or I need them to all be almost open, but not quite open. Or I have to have you remove all the leaves and thorns from here on down. Well, anyway, I decided, well, this isn't my thing. And I don't want to spend all day trying to do that. And it's so perishable. And then after a while, a friend said to me, so I was just giving away roses for about 2 years. Hey, come and cut roses. I gave them a lot to a prayer group who went to a hospital every week to pray for people. I said, you can give them flowers too. So that worked. But then a friend of mine said, since you're such a miserable bouquet maker, maybe you could cook those flowers. And I go, what do you mean? She says, well, you could make your own rose water. You could distill rose water. I go, I have no idea how to do that. She said, nobody's doing that. You should try that. And I actually followed it all the way down to eventually purchasing a still, building a building to put it in, making rose water. And after you make one thing, you say to yourself, oh, well, you know what? What else do I have that can go in a still? And eventually that became a line of 8 hydrosols that we produce on the farm from edible flowers, herbs, and things that we grow. So that was my first reason. I have a lot of stuff, and I don't know what to do with it.
That's great. That's great. And I would say that's very, that's right up there as the most common reason that I hear folks say that they're thinking about entering into value-added production. So that's great. Thank you guys for taking a minute to answer that. It helps me understand a little bit about where everybody is at. Let's go ahead and dig in. As I said, as we go along, as questions bubble up to the surface, use the chat box at the bottom so that we can make sure we answer those questions as we go along. So we're going to split this webinar into 2 parts, the business side and the regulatory side of value-added production, okay? And by that, basically, another way to think of it is there's a whole series of questions that I think you need to ask yourself before you start stirring a pot of jam or filing a permit with the FDA. Before any of the production, there's some questions about the fundamental business that I want to go into. And then, assuming you like all the answers that you get to those questions, let's talk about the procedures, okay? What are all the different rules and paths that you have to go down in order to get a business like this off the ground? And I will warn you, we're not going to be able to talk about all of them. But again, I'm happy to be a resource to folks after the webinar today. You'll get my contact information. We will also send out to everyone a list of links and other resources that are going to help you navigate some of those procedures. So we'll go as deep as we can without killing your love of farming and potentially value-added producing. And then we'll leave the rest for another day. So first, the business side, or as I put it, the questions. And specifically, these are 3 questions that everybody really should be asking themselves, again, before they start making the jam. And the 3 questions really have to do with your own operation, your current farming operation. How would value added fit in with that? And then additionally, what is the method of production? How are you going to make this product? Because you need to give a little bit of thought to that. Not all methods of production are the same. They have different implications for your business, for yourself, and for how you could eventually sell a product. And so it's important to think through that a little bit. And then just the most basic question, but also the hardest one to answer, is this even a good business move? Is this going to make sense? So let's dig into those questions. So that first one, how does this fit with my operation? This is a good moment to take stock and personally do a little bit of internal assessment. Think about, you decided, I'm going to sign up for this value added webinar. I'm really, I'm thinking pretty seriously about making something. Well, all right. What is it that's in your mind that you want to make? What is it that really excites you when you think about turning one of your fresh products, we'll call it, into something processed? What do you have to work with, right? Just as Janet was describing, she had a lot of extra, and that was a reason many people cited, right? So what are the things that are in excess? What are the things that you could easily grow more of, right? Look at your operation as it currently stands. Think about what you have to work with, and match that up with, hopefully, what you're already thinking you want to make. And then this is an interesting one. How much capacity do I have? This is about your operation, right? Could you grow more? If this product that you're thinking of got really popular, turned into a really good moneymaker, could you grow more? Could you expand? How would you do that? But it's also about your own personal capacity. Launching a new enterprise is going to take a lot out of you. It's going to take time. It's going to take finance. Do you have the capacity to do that? And if you can't imagine doing that, as we go through some of those procedures today, if you can't imagine yourself tackling all of that, you may need to think about, where do I free up capacity so that I can make this new business work, whether that's hiring someone to take over some of that fresh production, or scaling back something else to make more room. But really do a personal inventory. What's exciting you, right? What kind of product would you really love to do? What do you have to work with there as already part of your farm production? And how much, honestly, capacity do you have to take this on? And if I remember correctly, Janet, when we talked before, it was that first one, what do I want to make, that really lit the fire for you. I remember you talking about getting excited about making something.
That's right. And I think this is a value-added webinar, right? I wanted to make sure I said something just kind of from my personal perspective about value added. For me, the value that's added is you. It's your vision, your creativity, your imagination, your unique operation, your taste, what fires you up, what inspires you, because, what you are thinking about doing, it just might succeed. You had to prepare yourself. I've been making a joke since this farm started. Our tagline is prepared for anything but success. And you just might succeed, so prepare yourself. People just might love what you're thinking about doing. And then you'll find that your business starts to drive you and your actions. And if you go to the farmer's market or a retail shop that you sell to, however you market your products, the feedback you get will just fire up your imagination. And that's in part how your business will grow. So it's a little bit about, can I make more of this if people like it? Can I expand? But it's also, you might find yourself doing completely different things than you had anticipated. I was drying herbs, edible flowers, and things that we make on the farm and processing them in my way and putting them in jars. But I hadn't anticipated that one day someone would come to the farmer's market and it would turn out to be the daughter of the people that I buy my salt from. And she was standing in my booth for a long time, tasting a lot of things. And when I thought, well, maybe I should go over to her. Obviously, this young woman really is into salt. And talking to her, she said, I think I know what salt you're using. I go, really? I don't think you could do that. She says, oh, no, I'm pretty sure I do. I go, well, I just don't think so. She says, well, I think you're using Celtic sea salt. I go, how could you possibly know? She says, it's my family company. I recognize my product. So I gave her a bunch of jars saying, thank you. I picked it. Your salt's the best. I love it. A month later, I get a call from them saying, would you produce it in bulk for us and let us private label? Well, I didn't make that up. I didn't know hardly there was such a thing in the world. And that's turned out to be later, perhaps thousands of pounds of salt that don't go in jars, that I don't put lids and labels on, and just ship it in 50-pound sacks. Who knew? So, once you're committed, that quote, once you're committed, providence moves too, and the world brings all kinds of things to you that you would never have thought of had you not taken the step. So that's what I'm saying. Even now, you may think you know exactly what you want to do. What I'm saying is, try to gear up just in case you succeed, because you might, and then you need to be ready.
That's great. That's great. So that's that question of capacity. Sometimes you don't even know how much capacity it might require of you. And that's something, we're going to talk about, like, basically how to plan for this, some of the questions to ask yourself to be ready to make some very deliberate strategic steps. But I think Janet's pointing to some of the unpredictability of this, as is true for any farming operation, right? There are things you cannot anticipate. And so add a new dimension to it, you're going to add another variable. And so again, we'll go into as many things to make this kind of a strategic step-by-step process for you, and then be ready for the unexpected. All right, so second question, if you remember, the first was that sort of assessment. How does this fit with my operation? The second one is to give a little bit of thought to the best method of production for the product that you want to make. And this is something that is potentially going to have a lot of downstream effects on your value-added enterprise. So that's why it's important at the outset to give a little bit of thought to it. So how do you want to make it? And these production methods that I'm going to talk about are mostly around edible products, and primarily fruit or vegetable or nut derived products. So just keep that in mind as we go into them. So how are you going to make this? Well, there's three primary options for making a product from your fruit or vegetable for human consumption. One is a cottage foods operation. The other is what's called a processed food registration, or a PFR. I'm going to say PFR a lot today, so try and get your head wrapped around that, processed food registration. Or it's more complicated and slightly scarier sibling, a cannery. And then there's a third option, which is to work with a CoPacker. Each of these have a different implication for everything from the cost to get started to where you can sell it and what it's going to require of you, your own capacity. So it's important to just take a slight detour into each of these methods so that you could start to do that little bit of thinking, a little bit of questioning internally before, again, you start stirring pots and filing for permits. So cottage foods operation, this is, if there is a spectrum for value-added production, and that spectrum represents the risk, in terms of the hazard of for food safety, or the cost of startup, or the complexity. If there's a spectrum like that, cottage foods is all the way at the sort of lowest end. It's got the lowest startup costs because you're making a product not in a literal cottage, but in your home in order to sell. But it's also, fairly simplified because you can't just make anything in your home and sell it. So there's a very strict list of products from which you can choose. And it's that list we'll send out with some of those other resources after the fact, but that list is set by the state of California. And if it's not on the list, can't make it in a cottage food operation. Cottage food products that are made within a cottage food operation, you can sell most places. There's a couple of different types of operation we'll talk about. But one important thing to note is your label is going to say made in a home kitchen, and not everybody wants to buy or resell something that says made in a home kitchen. So that may have its own sort of limiting effect on where you can sell. It's also a county-based process. Basically, you get a permit from the county to do this. And currently, your neighboring county has the ability to say, can't sell it here. You're permitted by your county, but we don't want to see it in ours. It doesn't happen all the time, but it does happen. And so that becomes its own limitation. And then there's also a limitation on how much you can earn from this. $50,000 is the top. There's some changes in the works. I'll mention those as we go further on, like changes to some of those limitations that I said there. But cottage foods is kept fairly simple for some of these reasons. And then in terms of capacity, the demands on you, right? It's all on your shoulders. You can hire one employee and that's it, outside of family members. So for a cottage food operation, you got to expect that you're going to do it yourself, especially because it's going to happen in your kitchen. You can't build a kitchen in the barn and call it a cottage food operation. It literally has to be in your home kitchen. And I've seen people get turned away because they thought they could use a kitchen on site, but they wanted to just sort of keep it for their cottage food production. The environmental health folks are pretty strict about this. At least they are in Marin. And that's something to bear in mind. When I talk about a county, I'm coming from my perspective of working with Marin County. There may be slight variations. I'll try and remember to acknowledge that as we go through. So cottage foods, fairly simple, fairly low cost to start up, somewhere in the realm of $200 to $600. Depends a little bit on whether or not you have to have your septic system or your well inspected, but fairly low cost and fairly simple to set up. Next level up, or the next step in that spectrum of complexity and the cost, is to do one of these PFRs, a processed food registration, or a cannery license. This is a state level permit, okay? It comes from the California Department of Public Health, and permit fees are a little bit higher. You're gonna have higher facility fees because you can no longer use your kitchen, right? You have to rent a facility somewhere else that's going to pass state inspection, or build one. And that's where you could potentially set something up in your barn. But obviously that does not come without its own costs. Now, with a PFR or a cannery license, you can make just about any product and you can sell it just about anywhere. So there's a lot of flexibility in that respect. But you're going to do it all, right? You're going to do the processing, the permitting, all those things fall to you. Unlike cottage foods, you could hire as many people as you want to help, but especially at the early stages, right? Chances are you're going to be doing the work. So then the third production method at the farthest end of the spectrum in certain respects is working with a CoPacker. If this were live, I'd be asking people to raise their hands or shout out answers. It's a little bit different on Zoom, as we've probably all learned. But CoPacker, I'll just go ahead and define instead of asking somebody to throw out a definition. CoPacker is really just a facility that makes the product for you. And you enter into a contract with them. Generally, you give them the recipe or the formulation, and you agree to terms, and then they're going to just bang it out. They're going to make it, bottle it, label it, all of that. It doesn't come cheap. Generally speaking, there are going to be some costs and some back and forth just to getting the formula established. Oftentimes, a CoPacker is only going to work with a certain volume, right? So if you're just getting started and you want to test things out and you're not entirely sure, CoPacker is not going to be the way to go, because you potentially are going to have to ship them hundreds of pounds of your raw commodity to turn into something. And not every CoPacker is even going to work with that. Oftentimes, CoPackers want to work with their own supply chain of ingredients. And so as a farm that's looking to make something from your own products, you're going to have to choose your CoPacker very carefully, because one of your fundamental starting assumptions is it's my produce, my raw commodity. So a little bit of inflexibility there, certainly some cost to get started. But CoPacker can make darn near anything. And because they're already equipped to do this and churning out all kinds of other food products for other people, generally speaking, you're going to get to market pretty quickly. And unlike some of those other methods, they do darn near everything. Not for free, mind you, but they do all the permits and the licenses and the labeling and that sort of thing. So this range of options, from a cottage food to a CoPacker, each one has its own sort of level of startup costs, their own implications for what you make and where you sell it. This would be a good time maybe to hear from Janet. Janet, for your edible products, which one did you start with? Which one of these production channels or production methods did you start with, and are you still there?
Well, I started with we had almost everything I did came from some kind of mistake. We asked people to cut 2 pounds of Thai basil one day, and there was a miscommunication, and I got 42 pounds of Thai basil, which is a big pile. It's a lightweight, but it's a big pile. Well, I'm not going to throw it away. I have no plan for it. I don't know what I can do. I put a table next door. I put newspaper on it, a couple of fans, and I started a fire in the wood burning stove to warm it up. And then I go in there about 4 times a day and turn it over by hand, because you learn pretty quickly. I mean, the top's going to dry out, the bottom isn't. And as soon as you get too much disparity between one part of what's drying and another, you're in trouble. So you want to keep it all evenly, the same amount drying out. So I started with that and broke it down and realized to make it look good, I was going to need to rub it through a screen. So I did that. And then I had a nice even kind of crumb of dried Thai basil, which was really beautiful, but not any idea at all about what to do with that. But I didn't throw it away. And that's how this is just unacceptable. That what was I going to do? Put that in the compost? I don't think so. So, and all that labor. So it can start like that. And then I just moved through. My sister says I'm the expert at reinventing the wheel. I really feel like I started with a Stone Age idea of lay it down on newspaper and turn it with your hands. And I moved from there to getting some perforated stainless racks like they use in bakeries, and putting it on that and moving it closer to the wood burning stove. And then eventually asking a friend he's a maker, hey, can you make me a drying cabinet? And he got an old bread proofing cabinet and fixed it up and made it. And it worked really well. And then what I realized is if I put it in a little room in the back of the workshop, it would also heat that whole room and I could dry other things too. And then from there, eventually we put a propane fired digital ceiling mounted furnace and turned that whole room into a completely controlled drying environment with exhaust fans and dehumidifier. I mean, actually got into the, I would call at least 20th century on drying, and started getting very even dependable results. And that's pretty important too, that when you put it in there, you can pretty much count on that in a certain number of days, you're going to be taking it out and it's going to be in good shape, or whatever your process is. You get to the point where you're pretty confident when you put the cans in and take them out, they're good. You have to, so a lot of that goes on, and it's not about making money. It's about developing your vision and taking it into action and seeing if you can create some kind of durable product, so that, you know, as the farm goes along through the year, we're always drying things throughout the year. In the beginning, we were drying things so we didn't lose them. Now we're deliberately growing for the value added line too. Make sure we have plenty of sweet peppers. And what I told you, the story I told you about the salt people, who all of a sudden I'm making more salt than I ever could possibly dream of making in little jars. Another thing similar to that happened. Cowgirl Creamery makes some different seasonal cheeses. And years ago, they asked me if I could dry peppers to put on their Devil's Gulch cheese. So right when the farm's kind of winding down and we're getting toward winter, here comes this huge order for dried pepper flakes, hot and sweet pepper flakes. And then in the spring, when it's really hard to plant things and it's still raining, they have another cheese called Pierce Point. And we grow chamomile and Thai basil and other things for that cheese. So not in jars, not sold at the farmer's market, just straight to what I call petit industrial. I'm supplying people who make things. And that's a wonderful relationship. Both of those relationships are really have become very important to our yearly money flow. And especially they come at 2 dark times of the year, which is perfect. So, you know,
Okay.
and those are both things that I would have had no idea were going to show up, and did,
Sure.
and they're extremely valuable.
Okay, so I mean, I think what I'm hearing in that is really kind of the evolution of production method, which is a really important point for folks to remember. You may start making a product as a cottage food operation, but then graduate, if we want to call it that, to making something under a PFR, or graduate to working with a CoPacker. You may figure out where your market is and what your best formulation is, and what it is that you really want to be making and what works best with your operation. You may figure that out at a very low scale of entry in something like a cottage food operation, and then build up to a scale of production, both in terms of volume, but also this production method as a PFR type of operation, or as a working with a CoPacker. That may be where you ultimately wind up. And so being ready for the possibility of evolution, I think is a really great learning.
I just wanted to say one thing too. I was experimenting with like my Cuisinart in my kitchen to grind herbs into salt to try and figure out what would be a really good product. While I was doing that, we were converting a 2-car garage into what I called the workshop, which is our processing facility. And a farmer at the market gave me a 1-pager on basically, here's what you need to know if you want a commercial facility. So I could do all those things, but I wasn't really using it yet. Like I got the washable enamel paint, the sectioned sink with the sprayer. I sealed the floor, got stainless shelving, went to the restaurant place in the city and found a bunch of used big restaurant tables on wheels, stainless tables, bought those. And just kept, and like I said, we installed the furnace. And so we really had, I kept thinking, if I'm going to do it, if I'm going to do, I have this is my food processor certificate. And I got that because I had done everything to get ready for it before I needed it. And by the time I was ready to launch, I just said, every time I find out another thing, everything has to be 6 inches off the floor. I can do that. Everything has to be,
Great.
I can do that. And I just
Great.
kept doing it all.
Yep.
So yeah, by the time I was ready to actually bring something together, we were there. But I
There you
didn't
go.
have confidence that I had a business. And until I did, I didn't want to go through all the hassle and regulation and expense unless I was pretty confident this was going to work.
I love it. I love it. You're making the transition for me because we're going to dive into some of those business questions. Did want to just make a note about meat. I know we have some livestock producers here. If you are talking about wanting to sell sausage or some cuts of meat, something else from the animals you're raising, that's value-added production too. Think of taking your animals to auction is the equivalent of fresh production, just selling your carrots, selling your animals live at auction, and then turning it into something is the value add. And probably the closest parallel to what we just described for meat production is working with a co-packer, because you have to work with a facility to do the kill and the cut and wrap and turning it into sausage. You've got to work with a licensed facility to do those things, which, just like working with a co-packer, is going to mean some higher upfront costs. You may have some challenges, just like with a co-packer, finding one that'll do it, because there just aren't a lot of slaughter and cut and wrap plants out there. You'll need a certain amount of infrastructure to hold that product while you're selling it. But for virtually every step of the process, you'll be dealing with the USDA. I'm not going to go too much further into meat because it is a world unto itself. And I know most of the folks here today deal with vegetables and fruit. But again, you'll have my email address. We can talk offline. We can dig into the details. Just one note I did want to make, just as co-packer is at one end of the spectrum, and there are some more sort of DIY options like cottage food or getting a PFR like Janet was describing, there are a few DIY options within making a meat product that you can sell. The two I'm thinking of are, one is called a retail exempt facility, and one is just about selling live animals to consumers for custom processing, which is just off to the side from the USDA inspected slaughter and cut and wrap process. Not going to go too far into those. Like I said, if you're interested in making sausage or some other meat product from the livestock you raise, we can dig into that, just you and me. So the three questions were, how does it fit with my operation? What is the right method of production? And ultimately, how is that going to affect what I make and where I sell it? And there's this third question, the one Janet was saying, is this going to work as a business? Is this a good business model? And before she went in too deep, she wanted to feel confident about that. So how do you know if it's a good business? So I'm going to say the thing that most ranchers and farmers that I've spoken to hate to hear, which is, what is my business plan? Again, I would ask you all to raise your hand if you've been told that you should create a business plan. Virtually everyone at some point in this process gets recommended to make a business plan. I'm not going to go too far into that. I'm going to focus on just two things, because I think it's important for you to think through the market for the product that you have in mind and do some very simple financial projections. And those are going to help you get to the question that Janet was asking. Does this really have legs? Does this business have what it's going to take to support all the costs and things that are potentially going to go into it? So let's dig into those two pieces of a business plan, the market research and the financial projections. Market research is simple. What is not out in the market that I could provide? Where is there something unique that I feel is missing that I could do? And where are there already a ton of people trying to fill the space? If you have roses, like Janet was describing, maybe everybody and their brother is making bouquets, but nobody's making hydrosols. So you need to travel to farmers markets, see what people are making from the kind of commodity that you're dealing with. Go online, look at things like Good Eggs and see what's being sold. Local food market place is it's a web platform that people use. You can find all kinds of local food marketplaces online and see what products people are selling. Go to specialty shops, see what's on the shelf from other local farms. Just get a sense for where there's space in the market and see where you might be able to establish a little bit of your own ground. And while you're at it, figure out who the customers for that are going to be. I worked with an almond grower who was wanting to launch a line of value-added almonds, salted, honey roasted, different treatments. They went around and not only did they see what people were selling, but they asked them, who buys from you and which flavor is the most popular? And they gave some thought to what was really popular at a farmer's market versus what was really selling at the specialty stores, right? So you really need to take in a wide swath of the marketplace. And while you're doing that, take note of the prices, right? There's a degree to which your pricing should be driven by your costs, because obviously none of us are going into business to go out of business, but there's only so much the market will bear. So use what you see on the price tags around you as a starting place. Then, I can audibly hear like the heavy sigh, financial projections, okay? It's time to think about the money side of this. And for that, let me simplify this a little bit. Let's start with costs. You should already know as a farmer or rancher, what are the costs that it takes for you to produce the fresh commodity, the raw commodity. What do you pay in seed and feed and rent, utilities, all of those things, and mentally divide them between fixed costs and variable costs. This is going to help you in your analysis a little bit later. Fixed costs are the things that don't change, whether you grow 1 rose or 20. That's the rent you pay for the land or the mortgage. It might be a measure of the utilities. There are certain things that just don't change whether you grow a few or a lot. Those are your fixed costs. The variable costs are things that go up as you increase your production and come down as you grow less. Those are like your seed, maybe your fertilizer. Most labor is really a variable cost because as you grow more, you're going to need more people. It's going to take more hours. Don't forget to think about the marketing and sales costs. What do you pay for that market booth? In many ways, that's a fixed cost, right? Because it doesn't matter if you sell 1 rose or every bunch you brought, it's going to be the same booth fee. So again, think of the comprehensive world of what it costs to make your raw commodity and think in terms of fixed and variable. Then switch over to your processed product. This is where you have to kind of use your imagination because you haven't done it before, but that's why it's called a projection. And again, think in terms of fixed costs and variable costs. If you're going to get a PFR and use a commercial kitchen in town, you're going to pay a fee to use that kitchen. And it doesn't matter if you make 1 jar of pickles or, many, many, many jars. So that's a fixed cost. But how many cucumbers do you use? Well, as you make more pickles, that's a variable cost, the cost for the cucumbers themselves. And that's where this second note here about buy produce at cost or higher, okay? You have to calculate in your costs to make your processed food product, the cost of buying it from yourself. Many people think, well, I grew it, so I get to just put it in a jar. But from a financial standpoint, it's only going to work if you can pay yourself to grow the cucumber, the rows, that sort of thing. So as you are casting your mind forward to think about how much money you can make from this, you need to think about what you're going to have to pay, sort of the production side, the fresh production side, to get those raw commodities into your processing. And I say at cost, but the truth is you probably need to pay closer to retail. You need to pay closer to what you're selling it for, and I'll show you why. Again, marketing, sales, what's it going to cost you to sell we'll stick with pickles. What's it going to cost you to sell your pickles at a farmer's market? What's it going to cost if you sell them at, if you deliver them to a retailer in the South Bay? So think about all of those costs associated with making your processed food. And then, this is much more fun, think about the money you're going to make. Think about the money you make from your fresh commodities, right? How much can you sell, and what do you make from your different sales channels? Generally speaking, you make more if you sell direct to the consumer than if you sell it wholesale to a restaurant or a retailer. So tally up what you're making from those fresh products, and set that over to the side, and then start to think about, from your market research and knowing what products like the one you envision sell for, how much do you think you can make? How much can you charge per unit? How is that going to depend on the sales channel? If you're really focused on selling at farmers market, what's the price going to be at farmers market, and how much do you anticipate you're going to be able to sell, so you can have a total revenue from that processed product? This is all, if your mind is numb, as many farmers and ranchers go when we start to talk about this stuff, it might help if we start to talk about what you do with these numbers. So you're trying to find out, is this product profitable on its own? And that includes your own labor, and I'll show you where to put that. Is it going to break even? When is it going to break even? And this is where this idea of fixed costs and variable costs come in. How much do I have to sell for this thing to work? Sometimes we think about profitability as just, it cost me $3 to make it, and I sold it for $4, it's profitable. But break even is a little bit of a different angle into it, and so that's why I want to talk about it. And then ultimately, you got to compare it to your business model of just selling your product fresh. Ultimately, if selling pickles isn't more profitable or better for your business and your bottom line than selling those cucumbers fresh, then you might need to rethink something about this idea of value-added processing. And that's where you have to revisit things regularly. Even once you're up and running, come back to these numbers, come back to these calculations, and make changes, and sometimes make tough decisions about what to do based on the numbers. So here's an example, okay? You're growing pickling cucumbers. You know that if you grow 100 pounds, you can sell those for $4 a pound fresh at the farmer's market. And into those 100 pounds of cucumbers, you spend $3 a pound in variable costs. That was the seed, the fertilizer, the harvest labor, okay? And that yields a remainder, what's called the gross margin of $1 a pound, right? So that looks profitable to some people. It cost me $3 to grow it. I made $4. But here's where fixed costs, things like the mortgage on the land, and something else I want to talk about, your salary. That really you should think of as a fixed cost. How much money do you need to sustain yourself in your life? If this operation is paying for your health insurance, your kids' college, if it's paying for the gas in your car, that's a fixed cost, because the mortgage has to get paid month in and month out, no matter how many cucumbers you grow. So your salary, along with those other expenses potentially, go in your fixed costs. And so now you know that if on every pound you sell, you have $1 left over from those variable costs, then you're going to need to sell 500 pounds of those fresh cucumbers to break even, right? Because 500 pounds will yield 500 times that $1 gross margin. And that's what it takes to cover your overhead, to cover those fixed costs. So if you sold 400 pounds, somehow that remaining $100 of your cost to live, the mortgage on the farm, it's got to come from somewhere. And if it doesn't come from the farm production, ultimately the farm's going to suffer. So that's why thinking about fixed and variable costs and break even is important. Let's apply it to a value added product. You take those 100 pounds of cucumbers and you turn them into 200 quarts of pickles. You make $8 a quart, and of those, $5 were spent in variable costs. That was buying the cucumbers from yourself. This is about a half a pound of cucumbers. Then there's the jar, the label, the garlic, the dill. I don't know what else you put in your pickles. Put a lot of mustard in mine. So that leaves a $3 gross margin per quart. So if you have $1,200 in fixed costs, that's the commercial kitchen, that's the permits that you pay to the state, maybe even the feds, all those things. It doesn't matter if you make 1 quart or 100, those have to be made up by that gross margin. And that means you've got to sell 400 quarts in order to break even. Because that's the $1,200 in fixed costs divided by those $3 you make every time you sell a quart. And so a little further calculation is that means you're going to need 200 pounds to make those 400 quarts, and you still got to grow 300 more pounds and sell them fresh, because remember, you have to be selling 500 if your cucumber business is going to break even, right? You can't neglect one side of the business because now you've shifted your focus over to the value added. This is the kind of calculation that people spend months doing. Sometimes they take a business planning class. Sometimes they work with someone from the Small Business Development Center, the SBDC. So if this is feeling complicated or feeling beyond you, rest assured, you are not alone in that. But this is where you get the confidence to start spending money on your value-added business. And so that's why it's really important to step back and do some of the personal inventory of your own capacity, and to think about what this business really holds as promise, really. I've got another question to ask, but I think this is a good point to breathe. And I mean that literally. Really, take a breath. I need to take a breath. Most farmers and ranchers I know did not go into this to play with their calculator. I get it. But at some point or another, the calculator's got to come out. It might as well be now before you take the checkbook out. So, last question I want to ask before we get into those procedures, the rules. That's the part you're really looking forward to, right? One last set of questions really have to do with risk, okay? This is also a little bit of personal inventory. How much do you have to put on this operation, and how hard is it gonna hurt you to spend to get this thing off the ground? Especially if some of that money doesn't wind up turning into a product, right? Janet talked about how she suddenly had all this basil and she poured a lot of labor into it. And at a certain point, that was a lot of sunken costs. She decided to press forward because she wanted to earn something from it. And there is a law in psychology that says, once you invest a certain amount of yourself into something, it's so hard to walk away, even though your brain might be telling you, just let it go. So you're going to decide whether to press forward or just let it go. Thank God Janet didn't let it go and she pressed forward, right? But how much of that are you comfortable with? How much of that risk can you shoulder? And also think about your own personal cash flow and think about, is this going to satisfy what you need to keep your life on track? Especially because value-added products don't live on the same cycles that fresh produce do, right? Cucumbers, potentially you can sell week in and week out while you're harvesting and going to market. But for, did I say pickles? Cucumbers. But pickles, you are going to, in theory, amass those cucumbers, spend some time processing them. It's going to take time before every one of those quarts is sold and you realize some cash off of this. So how are you going to sustain yourself while you're waiting for this gold mine to emerge? So a little bit of financial risk, and then there's some legal risk that I feel people oftentimes also neglect. Do you have liability insurance for your fresh produce? Well, guess what? You're going to need a lot more when you start making value-added products. And you're going to need to make sure you talk to your insurance provider about it. Also, if you're making these things on the farm, that's going to affect your, sometimes they call them like a ranch policy or a whole farm policy, right? The liability insurance that covers your ranch. You may need to make a change to that to reflect the fact that you are now running a food processing business on the farm, especially if you're working with employees. And then also, how you organize your business affects your risk. As a sole proprietor, everything you own is on the line when you sell those pickles. If something, God forbid, went wrong, the liability travels through that jar of pickles all the way to your cat. Someone who, you know, files a suit or needs to be made whole because of, say, an illness because of your product, it all comes right back to you, an individual. Other forms of business formation, like an LLC, put sort of a firewall between the business, the product liability, and you, the person, and your cat. I don't have a cat. If I had one, I'd probably give it up for the pickle business. But I would protect my dog. I would protect my dog behind an LLC, you can bet. So a little bit of risk there to think about, something to stew on. Holy cow. Let's answer some questions. Do we have any questions in the chat? Forget this poll, forget that. Don't look at that. We're not gonna worry about that. Let's just answer a question. Is there a question? I see in the chat, Liana has made a great note where SBDC offices can help you create business plans. So true. And there are a million like business plan light templates online. We'll include some links in the resource packet that we send afterwards that will help you do some of those financial analyses, and also that could connect you to the SBDC or SCORE. No questions? Nothing? Okay. Half of you are
we allowed
asleep.
to ask questions out loud, or you want them only in the chat?
No, throw it at us, Steve. Give it to us. What's your question?
Okay, I have a couple, but the first one is expiration dates. Like I actually bought some of Janet's salt probably about 15 years ago. Or you might have given it to me, Janet. I don't want to give you, but I kept it for a very, very, very long time, and it's fine. But if I were to, do some co-packing or processing, let's say a mushroom product, how am I going to figure out what to put on that label for how long before it expires?
Janet, I'm going to give you an opportunity. I don't know if anything that you're selling has expiration dates and you want to share how you landed on those things, but I don't know if anything you're selling actually has an expiration date.
I don't have expiration dates on them. And Steve, it's still good. They've opened up the pyramids and found salt, and it's still good.
The short answer, Steve, is that most products don't require it, especially when we're talking about a shelf-stable product. It's an optional thing. And oftentimes putting it on the product is kind of a marketing thing, right? It helps move the product and ensure that you don't sit on that salt, you use it so that you can go buy some more. Legally, there are a few perishable things, especially refrigerated items that have to have an expiration date. And in terms of how you settle on one, that's an interesting question. To my knowledge, there's no legal formula for it, but I'd have to dig a little bit closer. into that. My understanding is that the manufacturer themselves gets to set that date. And it's in many ways, it's about reputation more than anything else. If somebody opens something before the date you put on it, and by golly, it's bad. So that's where manufacturers oftentimes set their dates, is well early of anything like that. You see, you had another question? Are we good?
I could come up with another one if no one else wants to go first.
Throw another one at us, and then we're gonna go down the regulatory rabbit hole.
So this is a little technical, but a while back, Vince, you said for a commercial kitchen licensed by the state. But I think of the commercial kitchens as licensed by the county. And I just want to be clear that if a commercial kitchen is licensed by the county, we could then produce something there and sell it in neighboring counties.
Okay, good. So that's definitely a regulatory question, but I'll take a minute and clarify it, because I'm not sure if I specifically call that out in the next section. So here's how it works. You're right. Most of those rental kitchens are certified by the county as what's called a food facility. But if you are making a processed food under, say, a PFR or a cannery license, that facility is going to be inspected by the state as part of getting your PFR. And so even though the county is willing to let caterers use it, they're willing to let, I don't know, somebody else use it for some other purpose. That does not mean the state will like it for the purposes of the product that you are proposing to make. Good example would be, maybe you're making pickles and maybe you need a cannery license to do that. People could be churning out catered meals from that thing all day long, and the county is perfectly happy, but there's no way it's necessarily going to satisfy the state to be a licensed cannery. And so that's where, when you're choosing a place to use to make your processed food, find out what kinds of products are already being made there. If somebody already has a PFR and they're making their products there, or they already have a cannery license and they're making their products there, it's a pretty sure bet that you're going to pass muster when your application goes through the state channels. But that's what I mean when I say a state permitted or a state licensed. Does that distinction help, Steve? I see you nodding. I'll take it.
Thank you.
Okay, cool. All right, let us proceed. I want to make sure we have time at the end for questions. So let's dig into the regulations, or as I call it, the procedures. And let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, this is my jam. This is what I do. It is boring as heck to most people, but it's an important part of this. So let's take a minute. So there are rules for just about everything. Every farmer knows this. And these rules are going to depend a little bit on those production methods. They're going to depend a little bit on your market channel, where you're selling it. It's also going to depend a little bit on where you are as a farm. And the rules will vary a little bit for reasons of food safety. So these are the 4 areas we're going to explore from a rule-based standpoint. Here we go. So let's go back to those methods of production. And we talked about a cottage food operation way at the sort of simple and cheap and easy end of the spectrum, right? If you decide that you're going to do a cottage food operation, the first thing you got to do is decide, am I a class A or a class B? Not type A, not type B, class A or class B. And here's some important things about it. Both are capped at $50,000 a year in revenue, but class A cottage food operation can only make direct sales. And direct sales means basically I have the product in my hands here and I put it in your hands, the consumer, the eater. That is a direct sale, okay? There's no intermediary. There's nothing between me and the person who consumes it. So class A can only do direct sales. You don't have to be inspected by the county. Your kitchen is not going to be paraded through as a part of getting the permit, though they could at any time if there was some reason to think there was a problem. But there's no mandatory inspection to get started. Important thing, no mail. you can't sell something or online as a cottage food operation and then mail it to them. Okay, and that's true whether you're Class A or Class B. Now, remember I said things are changing a little bit? Okay, there is a law in the state legislature right now called AB 1144. It would raise the cap for Class A folks to 75,000, meaning you could make and sell more before you cap out. It would also make it possible to mail products to people. That would be a big deal, especially coming out of COVID and knowing how much online sales has really blossomed. So if cottage food is interesting to you, be watching this bill. Class B, currently capped at 50K. You can do direct or indirect, which means you could sell to a restaurant. If you're making chutney, you could sell it to a restaurant and they could put it on their customers' plates, or you could sell it to a retailer and they could put it on their shelf. That's an indirect sale because you're not putting it in the consumer's hands. Perfectly okay as a Class B, but you will need to get inspected at startup. So the county's going to come in and they're going to look at your home kitchen. And AB 1144 would raise that cap big time to 150K, allow for mail delivery. It also would make a Class B's products saleable throughout the state. Remember I said that some counties will look at your cottage food product and say, well, you're okay in your county where you're registered, but can't sell it in ours. Well, this would actually kind of take that option away from counties and say that it is saleable across the state. But you would have to get an annual inspection. So that means every year, rain or shine, you're going to get an inspection in your kitchen facility, whereas currently it's just an initial inspection. Other considerations, okay, this is a permit through the county. It's called a registration. Fees vary. I think Class A in Marin is right around 200. I think Class B is about 400, but they are going to look at your septic system and they're going to look at your well. So if you're not on a municipal waste, if you're not on a sewer, if you don't get water from the city in Marin, they're going to look at those systems and they're going to charge you to look at those systems. And I know a lot of ranches whose septic systems are a little old, or maybe their well was dug by their granddad and isn't permitted. So you might think you're getting an $800 cottage food permit from the county and wind up putting in a $60,000 septic system. So my advice is, if you're going to go down this road, hire a septic contractor to come in and look at your system. Find out if it's permitted, find out if it would pass muster. Check those things before you start bringing in the inspectors. And that registration is renewed every year. You're going to have to complete a food handler course, which is generally an online course. We'll include this link. There's loads of them that are permitted through the state, so you can take one from the comfort of your own home. And then you got to make a label. Here's a funny thing: cottage food products, they're at that sort of simpler end of things, but their license is really long, or their label is really long, because they have a registration number and the county from which that registration number was issued. You don't obviously see that on other food products. And you have to say made in a home kitchen. So label for a cottage food business is a little bit longer. One note about nutrition labeling, that's this guy here, right? That is not required for a cottage food label unless you are going to make a nutrient or a health claim. Low fat, good for your heart, gluten-free. Once you start making claims like that, you've got to get a nutrition facts or a nutrition label. And that's probably something you're going to wind up paying somebody to make. And we'll include some links if you have to go down that road so that you could get that done. But my advice to folks is just don't make those claims, at least at the outset, because it's an expense and complexity that may not really translate into more revenue. That's a hard choice you'll have to make. Maybe gluten-free is where your special niche is, and you want that label. But you can bet then you're going to need to lay out for those nutrition facts. Okay, PFR. Next step in the chain of options, this is state-based, California Department of Public Health, CDPH. First thing to do is confirm eligibility. Is the thing you want to make, is it makeable as a PFR? Anything on the cottage foods list, you can make as a PFR. Traditional fermented foods like sauerkraut, those sort of salt brined pickles, kimchi, these things can be made with a PFR. They become safe through the fermentation process, not through adding acid. And refrigerated foods. So even low acid things that are made to be stuck in the refrigerator case, you can make with a PFR. This is nice because what you're going to see is the cannery license gets complicated. And if the same product that's kept in the fridge goes through a PFR, and that makes it easier. Now you have different issues in terms of keeping and storing the product and where you can sell it, but refrigeration is a way of simplifying things. You got to find a facility. Steve was asking about that, right? Find a commercial kitchen somewhere. They're not cheap. Most of them are going to be at least a couple hundred a month if you're renting. Oftentimes, they're going to want a monthly fee, and you're going to get a certain number of days or a certain number of hours. Some kitchens might allow you to just run a batch periodically and charge you for that, but you might need to get ready for a monthly cost. And you can make as much as you can during that time. Then you got to submit your application to the California Department of Public Health. Runs $300 to $500. You may have to pay an additional safety fee. You may have to pay what's called a HACCP fee and develop a HACCP plan. Mostly that's juice, a couple of other very special items. If you want to be labeled organic, you have to, on top of this, get an organic PFR. And so you'll also need to work with your organic certifier as well to expand your OSP or organic systems plan, make sure this product fits. So that's the sort of paperwork side. You're gonna, same as cottage food, complete your food handler course, and then you're gonna make a label. Identical to cottage foods, just doesn't have those things about a home kitchen or your registration number. Notice nutrition labeling is a little bit different here. So the FDA, which requires that nutrition label, they say that you can be exempted if you're really, really small, 10 employees or less than 10,000 units a year sold. So low production, you don't have to make that label, and you don't even have to tell the FDA that you are considering yourself exempt. Get a little bit bigger, somewhere between 10 and 100 employees, or between 10 and 100,000 units, you can still be exempt, but you've got to notify the FDA. You have to file for that exemption. Once you get past 100 employees or 100,000 units, you will have to make that nutrition label. But at that point, you might be working with a CoPacker. And at that point, they're probably going to do that heavy lifting for you. The same caveat with cottage foods applies here. The minute you say heart healthy, low calorie, the minute you start making claims like that, you're going to have to make a nutrition label, no matter how small you are. So again, think very carefully about what it's going to earn you to make those kinds of claims. Oh boy, we are running out of time. Okay, you're going to get an inspection of that facility before you start producing, and you're going to renew that every year. And that inspection isn't free. Cannery license is same people, California Department of Public Health, but you have to get your product tested. Very first step, you send it to a lab at the University of California, and they establish the acidity. They establish what's called the water, I'm blanking. But they test it to make sure that it really does fit with the cannery license program. Maybe it's sufficient to go into a PFR, but they're going to establish either that it is an acidified food, meaning it's safe because you added an acid like lemon juice or citric acid or vinegar, or it's a low acid food. You didn't add any acid, but you made it safe because you cooked the heck out of it. So a couple of pathways as a cannery. You're going to choose a facility. and it's got to be one that can do all the things a cannery needs to do. You're going to file your applications with the state, and that includes a PFR. You need a PFR just to warehouse or store product, even if it has nothing to do with processing. So you might get a cannery license and then a PFR just to store your product while you're selling it, plus an organic PFR. Do your training, including a second course called the Better Process Control School. This is for the FDA. You're going to make your label, which is all that's the same as a PFR. That's like 4 pages for just for a cannery license. If you've noticed, as we moved along, there's more slides for each type of production. Cannery license keeps going. You get an inspection before you start producing, you register with the FDA, and then you get another inspection before you can sell anything. It's called a batch release, where they come in and look at your procedures. So you have to have kept records all throughout to make sure that you're doing everything you need to do to keep it safe. And once you get that batch release inspection, then you can start selling your pickles. The flip side is cannery licenses are renewed every 2 years, where the PFR is every 1 year. All right, CoPacker, guess what? 1 slide with 1 bullet, and that's that warehousing PFR, just to store the product. So the CoPacker makes it, they send you cases, pallets of stuff. You need a PFR from the state just to keep it at your place. But beyond that, the CoPacker is going to take care of pretty much everything. All right. There's all kinds of rules we haven't even talked about. Farmers market rules. Talk to your farmers market about what you can and can't sell and what kind of documentation you need to provide. Whether you can sell in the certified section or not depends a little bit on what else you're selling. Retailers have different requirements, like they may want to be included on your liability insurance as an additional insured, and make sure you're keeping sales records for those retailers, because some of the rules around food safety and what you do and don't have to do depend on where you sell it. And so you need to make sure you're recording what things went to retailers versus things that went direct to consumer. That you need to find out if you're making it on the farm, is processing food on the farm an acceptable land use? Is your land zoned for this kind of facility, or is it just zoned for milking cows and growing corn? Something to check on. Your environmental health department, we talked about them wanting to see your septic system and your domestic water, which is your well, potentially as part of a cottage food operation. You may need a business license depending on your county. If you're in unincorporated land, you may need a business license or you may not. And if you're planning from your facility to spray your wastewater out on pasture, say, instead of putting it in a septic system or into a municipal system, you're going to need a wastewater permit. Oh, man, so many rules, so many rules. FSMA, holy smokes, Food Safety and Modernization Act. This is the FDA's more recent rules. Really, the only thing that applies here is the preventative controls. Okay, going fast here. Produce rules is for fresh produce. Preventative controls is for processed foods. So the main thing I focus on with this, there are 2 kinds of things within FSMA, the good manufacturing practices, and then the much more complicated HARP-C. Many of you would probably be either exempt from both the good manufacturing practices and HARP-C, or more likely partially exempt, because either you're making it on the farm and it's a low risk food product and it's a pretty small level of production, or because you're not on farm and it's not necessarily low risk, but it's very small production, in which case you have to file some attestations with the FDA. But generally speaking, those kinds of facilities, which is where a lot of farms would fit, they're exempt from that HARP-C element, and they simply need to make sure that they're complying with the good manufacturing practices and keeping records of their sales. What is this number? Just tried to finish on a bright note. Nobody knows what this number is. This is the number of farms and ranches in Marin County that I could easily tick off in my head that are currently making value-added products of one kind or another. Could be meat, could be cheese, could be jam, could be hydrosols. That's a lot in one county. So if you're feeling overwhelmed and wanting to leave the webinar and forget about value-added production, think about this. There are a lot of farms doing this. They have made it work. It sounds complicated when somebody drones on for 90 minutes about it. But with the benefit of some time, and let's face it, from Janet's story, some gumption, some determination, it can be done. It can be done. And there's help along the way. So take heart in that number. Liana, do we have time to do a question?
There was actually one in the chat about the USDA value added grant program. Do you know anything about that, or can you give some resources about that? Because that may be a whole nother topic.
I will say a little bit very briefly. The Value Added Producer Grant, VAPG, it's a very competitive grant program, but it's one of the few that can push money right to the farm or ranch. Mostly these grants come in two flavors. One is a feasibility study. So they'll pay to do some of that market research. They'll pay to do some of those financial projections. Okay. And in that you can hire a vendor to do that. Okay. So that might be a way to really get some confidence and comfort with it. Or there are grants that actually will pay to initiate your new product line. They won't pay for equipment, but they will pay for some of those operating costs, labor, packaging, marketing, and sales. So that is a pretty cool program by the USDA. Like I say, it's very competitive. We actually just finished the application cycle about 3 weeks ago. So it'll come back around in a year. But if you time it right, you can do a feasibility study with the grant, and then take that study and apply for a second grant to get the funding to do the packaging and the operating costs and that sort of thing. That's all I'll say on that. Other things in the chat that you noticed, Liana?
Steve also mentioned that his organization, the Interfaith Sustainable Food Collaborative, has contacts with local kitchens. So there may be some opportunity there, and he put his contact. We can also share the contact in our resource email that goes out with the recording.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Steve.
I also put a couple links to surveys in the chat. So if you have a minute as we finish up, we would really love your feedback. There's a survey in English and a survey link in Spanish. And again, these will also go out in the email. So that's what I have for the chat.
I want to make a plug for everybody to really do that survey, because Liana and AIM has been working hard to really boost the potential, the viability, the profitability of farms that are under their wing within their markets, and really agriculture writ large. And for some reason, with all of that good intention, they asked me to come and talk to you guys today. And they're not going to ask me back unless you give them some feedback that shows there's some value there. So take the survey, tell us if this was good, if it wasn't good, at least let them know whether or not they should call my number or delete me from their contacts. Okay. We will also include my contact information. In fact, I think we can, oops, there we go. There's my contact information. There's Janet's, Liana's. I am available to help folks think through these things, dig deeper with your own operations. So get in touch. And we will send out a lot more useful links tied to the information we went into. So be watching for that as well.
Vince,
yes.
I just wanted to say, I jotted down just a few reasons you might really want to do this. One is it helps make a plus out of what would have been a minus. That was when I was going to have to throw away product, but instead I found a way to save it. It uses the whole harvest. So sometimes your culls are extremely high quality. They just have a mark here or there, but they're harmed for retail reasons, but they're perfect for processing. It diversifies the offering of a single farm. Right now we have spring onions, leeks, and green garlic, which is about not to have green garlic, but we have 24 products in jars and 8 hydrosols. So we still have game. We have name recognition that we wouldn't have if we weren't in different places with our name on a label, and that helps. It increases the value of a crop. Sometimes you can really, we can sell a jar of dried oregano for $10 at the farmer's market. We're pretty sure we're making money on that.
Pretty sure? Oh no,
Well,
Janet,
that's why I
we've got to
said pretty
go.
sure, only pretty sure. We have, and we sell, and if you buy 3, then it's 3 for 25 instead of 3 for 30, and that helps sell jars. We can sell in every season. We can be at the market even when we hardly have a thing and it's pouring rain. There's a gift market out there. And even though I think an armful of gorgeous leeks is a great gift, you might actually want to, have something for Mother's Day and Christmas. It really works. Online sales, which you can have. We have a website. Boy, did that take off after COVID. It went up 163% after COVID. We can be in retail and curated shops all around the Bay Area. That's really great. You can have unique collaborations like us with the cheese people. They make a unique cheese, we make a unique, we put it together, nobody can touch it. It's a creative enterprise. It uses all of you, not just lifting heavy things. You can invent your own tools. I had to get a unique product. I needed unique tools and I had them made. And well, anyway, and value your mistakes, because there's going to be a heap of mistakes behind every success. I just don't know that it works any other way. But you're here, you're thinking about it, try it, do it, and pester your friends and your family. Try this. Tell me, do you like it? Do you hate it? Would you buy it? What would make it better? Pester everybody, your kids, everybody. Okay, other than pester everybody, you can't start too small. So even in your kitchen, you can say, what is the thing that I'm going to make that's going to make people come to my booth every week? Because this is great. Okay, that's all. And thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Janet. Really great advice from somebody who's been doing this for a while. I'm so appreciative that you were able to join us today, and hope that folks are getting good inspiration from hearing you talk.
I'll second that. And thank you, Vince, also for all of this information. And I'll put another plug in that if you'd like more information, please contact Vince. He's there to support you. And feel free to contact me as well if you need more contacts of other experts. That's part of what we're trying to do, is just connect folks to people who can give you the technical assistance and the training that will help you be as successful as you can be. So thank you, Janet. Thank you, Vince. And thank you for all of our attendees. And thank you also to our interpreter today for being here and providing this information in Spanish. So
thanks, everyone.
Okay.
Bye-bye.